When I saw his device, I knew I had to try it out. I know it's not good to peek, but he was beautiful. My soccer teammate Nick was washing up in the shower after our winning game when it happened. The room was full of steam and loud with celebration. Guys cracking jokes, some still in cleats, others already toweling off. But I stayed quiet, tucked near the corner, pretending to text while I cooled off and waited for a chance to rinse off last. That's when I saw it. Nick had taken the end stall, right under the strongest stream, the water cascading over his shoulders, his body glistening in a way I couldn't ignore. He wasn't shy, never had been. Stood like he owned the space, one hand casually brushing through his hair while the other, let's just say he was taking his time, like he enjoyed the routine a little more than most guys did. I should have looked away, but I didn't. I wasn't trying to stare. Really, I wasn't. But once my eyes landed there, it was like gravity took over. He was just different. Big, for one. Thick. And it wasn't just the size, though, yeah, that stood out. It was the way he carried it. Like it wasn't a big deal. Like he didn't even realize how unfair it was to walk around with something like that. I'd never seen anything like it in person. Not on a guy the first knew. Definitely not on someone like Nick. Cool, chill, always joking around. He was the kind of teammate everyone liked, but no one really looked too closely at. Except me, I guess. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next day, it was all I saw. Every time he walked across the field, every time he adjusted his shorts, my brain filled in the blanks. I felt like a creep, but that didn't stop it. It made everything worse. Or better. I don't know. After practice, I hit the showers late again, hoping he'd already be done. But luck, or something else, had other plans. Nick was still in there, alone this time, and the air was thick with heat and soap. He didn't look surprised to see me. In fact, he gave me this little nod, like we'd been expecting each other. "Sup," he said, rinsing shampoo from his hair, water streaming down his chest and stomach. I nodded back, trying to keep my eyes on the tiles. But then he shifted slightly, just enough to turn toward me. And there it was again. No hiding, no shame. I swallowed hard and stepped into the far stall, even though it didn't help much. Not with the way the image had already burned itself into my brain. He didn't say anything else. Just stood there, under the water, arms behind his head. Like he had nothing to hide. And maybe he didn't. I don't know what I was expecting to happen next. Maybe I thought I'd forget about it once I got under the water. Maybe I thought I could scrub away the thoughts that were already swirling in my head. But standing just 2 stalls down from Nick, hearing the water hit his skin, it made it impossible. I tried to keep my focus forward, on the blank wall, but every so often, my gaze shifted. Just a glance. Just a quick flick of my eyes when I thought he wasn't looking. But Nick wasn't dumb. At one point, I caught him catching me, not in an obvious way. He didn't smirk or call me out like I feared he would. He just turned slightly, not enough to be overt, but enough to be seen, his eyes meeting mine for a split second through the rising steam. He didn't look away. That messed me up more than anything else. Later that night, I lay in bed and couldn't stop thinking about that look. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't mocking. It was something else. Curious, maybe even open. Like he knew I'd seen, and he didn't care. Like maybe he wanted me to. The next few days blurred together. Practices, classes, late-night study sessions that ended with me staring blankly at my notes and thinking about the way the water had clung to his skin. I couldn't stop noticing him. The way his shorts always seemed to sit a little lower than they should. The subtle adjustment he made before a sprint. The bounce of that heavy bulge when he jogged up the bleachers ahead of me. And it wasn't just me, right? I mean, the other guys had to notice it too. But no one said anything. Maybe they didn't want to be that guy. Or maybe they didn't dare. One afternoon, after a hard scrimmage, we all filed into the locker room. Sweaty and sore. Guys started peeling off jerseys and laughing about a failed pass or a near goal, and Nick dropped onto the bench beside me. "You coming out tonight?" he asked, untying his cleats. I hesitated. "Where?" "Cam's place. Little after party. Nothing wild." I shrugged. "Maybe." He nodded like he expected that, then stood, stretching lazily before heading toward the showers again. And even though I told myself to stay behind, to let the moment pass, I followed. This time, I didn't take the far stall. I took the one right next to his. The divider was short. There was maybe a foot of space at the bottom, enough to see legs and feet, the subtle movement of bodies. And when I turned the water on, I could feel the warmth of his stream mixing with mine. It was stupid how thrilling that felt. Neither of us said anything, but we didn't have to. There was this quiet, charged stillness between us, like we were standing at the edge of something, and neither of us wanted to be the first to name it. I could hear him breathing, steady and calm. I could see his feet, spread slightly apart, like he was completely at ease. And then he did it. Shifted again, stepped just enough into the shared space that I caught the outline of him through the steam. No more hiding, no more wondering. It was right there. And for a second, just a second, I let my gaze drop. He didn't move away. If anything, he stepped a little closer. That night, I ended up at Cam's after all. The house was already full by the time I got there. Red cups everywhere, music loud enough to feel in my ribs, someone yelling over the blender in the kitchen. Classic team party. Everyone fresh from the win, loose and a little tipsy. I spotted a few teammates already plastered, dancing in that awkward shoulder shimmy way guys do when they think it still looks cool. I wasn't in the mood, not really, but Nick was already there, leaning against the kitchen counter, drink in hand, laughing at something a girl said. He looked up and caught me watching almost instantly. No surprise on his face, just a nod, like he'd been waiting. I moved through the crowd, grabbed a soda just to have something to hold. Tried not to hover, but every time I looked up, Nick's eyes were still on me. Eventually, he broke off from the group and walked over, that same easy stride like nothing had changed between us. "Didn't think you'd show," he said, bumping his shoulder lightly into mine. "Yeah, well, you asked," I said, trying to play it off. "Didn't want to leave you hanging." He chuckled, took a sip of his drink, then looked around the room. "You ever notice how everyone always ends up in the kitchen?" I shrugged. "It's where the snacks are. And bad decisions." That line hung between us for a second. Then he stepped a little closer, dropped his voice just enough that it barely cut over the music. "Come outside with me." I didn't even hesitate. We slipped out the back door, into the cooler air. The backyard was empty except for 2 lawn chairs and an old fire pit that hadn't been used in a while. Nick sat on the edge of the deck, legs stretched out, and I dropped next to him, our knees almost brushing. It was quiet out here, peaceful. The kind of quiet that made you hyper-aware of the space between you, and how little of it there was. "I've been thinking," Nick said after a pause, turning his cup in his hands. "About what you saw." "In the showers." My stomach tightened. "Yeah?" He didn't look embarrassed, just thoughtful. "I didn't plan it or anything," he said, "but I noticed you looking. And I didn't hate it." I swallowed hard, unsure where this was going. Nick looked at me, really looked this time. "You ever try anything with a guy before?" The question hit harder than I expected. I shook my head. "No, but I've thought about it." He nodded like that made sense. Then, after a pause, "I have." I blinked. "Really?" "Yeah," he said quietly. "Couple times. Never told anyone. Didn't feel like something I had to explain." I didn't know what to say. My heart was pounding, and not from the music inside. This moment felt like standing on a ledge, knowing one step would change everything. "I keep wondering if I made that up," I said finally. "What I saw, what I thought I felt." "You didn't," he said, voice steady. And then he leaned in. Not all the way. Just enough that I could feel his breath, smell the faint scent of whatever body wash he always used. His hand brushed mine, not grabbing, just resting there. "Testing." "Do you want to?" he asked. I looked at him, at the way his expression softened, at the quiet patience in his eyes. Like he wasn't pushing, just offering. I nodded. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I do. We didn't kiss out there. Not that night. It wasn't that kind of moment. No fireworks, no sudden rush. Just silence, thick with understanding. His hand stayed on mine a little longer, his fingers lightly brushing against the side of my palm. It was more intimate than anything I'd ever felt, and somehow, it was enough. When we went back inside, everything looked the same. The crowd, the noise, the red cups on every flat surface. But something had shifted between us. I felt it in the way he kept glancing over, even while talking to someone else. The way his body always seemed to angle slightly toward mine, even when we weren't standing close. He didn't try to follow me home. Didn't even ask. We just nodded at each other when I left. But my mind wouldn't stop replaying the way he looked at me on that deck. That calm, quiet confidence. That steady, unspoken promise. The next week was a strange kind of limbo. We didn't talk about it. Not directly. But it was there. In the way he waited for me after practice instead of heading to the showers first. And how he sat closer during team film reviews, legs pressed just barely together. No one else seemed to notice. Or maybe they did, and just didn't care. What messed with me the most was how easy it all felt. Like this wasn't some big forbidden thing. It was just us, slowly orbiting each other, waiting for gravity to do the rest. Then came the night he invited me over. It was nothing special on paper, just, come through man, I've got that new FIFA and a leftover pizza. But my stomach did this stupid flip when I read the text. I told myself it was casual, friendly, no pressure, and yet I still changed my shirt twice before leaving the house. His place was quiet, half lit by the TV glow, the controller already sitting on the couch. He looked up from his phone when I came in, gave me that familiar, easy grin. Still suck at defense? He asked. Still better than you, I shot back. We played 2 full matches, talked trash, laughed, elbowed each other a little too much during goal replays. But under all of that, there was this pulse, like both of us were waiting for the other to make a move. It happened during the 3rd game. He leaned in to grab the remote, and our knees bumped. He didn't move. Neither did I. Then his hand slid down slow and rested on my thigh. He didn't look at me, didn't say anything, just left it there, warm and sure and completely unambiguous. My breath caught. I turned to him, heart pounding in my chest, and finally said what had been burning a hole in my throat all week. I think about it, you know, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Nick finally looked at me. What do you think about? You, I said, that night. The way you looked at me. The way you let me look back. A beat passed, then another. And then, with no fanfare, no hesitation, he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't messy or rushed. It was slow, careful, like he wanted to give me a way out, even though he knew I wouldn't take it. His lips were soft, and his hand moved from my thigh to the back of my neck, pulling me in just a little closer. When we pulled apart, I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at him, and he looked right back. You good? He asked, his thumb grazing the side of my jaw. I nodded. Yeah, I'm really good. After that night, everything changed, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't weird. If anything, it was easier, more natural, like whatever tension had been simmering between us finally found somewhere to land. We didn't talk about it much. We didn't need to. The way he looked at me across the locker room, the way I caught myself staring just a second too long, it all said enough. We kept it quiet, not for shame or fear, but because it felt like ours. Something unspoken and real that didn't need validation from anyone else. A shared language made of glances, brushes of fingers when no one was looking, stolen moments behind closed doors. The next few weeks, we found excuses to be around each other more. Extra workouts, study nights that barely involved books. We'd start with small talk, maybe a movie, maybe FIFA, but it always ended the same. One of us leaning in, the space between us disappearing like it had never been there. One night, he stayed over, not just crashing on the couch or dozing off during a movie, We shared my bed, bodies tangled under a single blanket, skin against skin in the dark. Nothing rushed, nothing crazy, just the kind of closeness that makes your chest ache in the best way. I woke up at 3 a.m. to find him already awake, staring at the ceiling like he was figuring something out. "You good?" I whispered. He turned to me, his voice low. "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" He was quiet for a second. Then, "This. Us." I shifted onto my side, propped up on an elbow. "What about us?" Nick looked at me. There was something vulnerable in his eyes. Not scared exactly, but open in a way I hadn't seen before. "I didn't think this would feel so easy," he said. "Does that bother you?" "No," he said. "That's the weird part. It doesn't bother me at all." I reached out, traced my fingers lightly across his arm. "Maybe it's not weird," I said. "Maybe it's just right." He exhaled, long and slow. Then he pulled me in, and we lay there chest to chest, not saying anything for a long time. That became our rhythm. We still went to practice, still hung out with the guys, still kept things cool in public. But in private we were something else, something I'd never had before. It wasn't about labels, it wasn't about defining it. It was just us, figuring it out one quiet night at a time, and slowly, without realizing it, I stopped watching him from the corner of the locker room. Because now he looked at me the same way. The season kept rolling. More games, more late-night bus rides, more wins. But something had shifted. And not just in me. Nick and I had found a rhythm, one that lived in the spaces between everything else. The quiet walks to his car, the way he'd brush my lower back as we passed each other in the hallway, the unspoken understanding whenever our eyes met across the field. No one ever said anything. Either they didn't notice, or they did and chose to leave it alone. We didn't flaunt it, but we weren't hiding either. Not really. It was just us. Our thing. Still, part of me kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. I guess I expected it would end. Maybe he'd freak out. Maybe he'd pull away or say it was all just a phase. I braced for it. But it never came. Instead, one night after an away game, we were back at his place, both of us exhausted, lying side by side on his bed. He was scrolling through something on his phone, his leg draped casually over mine, his shirt halfway off. "You know what sucks?" he said suddenly. I looked over. "What?" "I kinda hate that we have to act like this is nothing when we're out there." I didn't say anything at first. Then I said, "You don't have to pretend if you don't want to." He nodded, slow. "I know, I'm just figuring it out." I gave him a minute. Then, "Is it okay that I want this to be something?" He looked at me like I'd just given him permission to breathe. Set the phone down, rolled toward me, and placed a hand gently on my neck. "It already is," he said, "even if I suck at saying it." And that was enough. After that, things didn't get more dramatic. They got simpler. Nick started inviting me to things as just me, not as his buddy or teammate. He didn't correct people if they raised an eyebrow when we left together. Sometimes, he'd touch the back of my neck absent-mindedly while we waited in line at a coffee shop, and every now and then, he'd just say it outright. "I like being around you. Don't want that to stop." It never felt like a secret after that, just something we were finally ready to admit. Months later, on the night of our end-of-season banquet, I saw him in a suit for the first time, clean-shaven, still that same laid-back swagger, but just polished enough that it hit me like a gut punch. He caught me looking and grinned. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," I said. "Just you clean up all right." He stepped closer, leaned in until no one else could hear. "You should see what's underneath." I laughed, low and shaky. "I already have." Later, when the night died down and everyone scattered into cabs or after parties, we stood outside the hall under the pale streetlights, the air just starting to turn cold. Nick looked over at me, then reached out, slowly, carefully, and took my hand. No one said anything. No one stared. And even if they had, I wouldn't have cared. Because there, under the stars and the buzz of streetlights, he squeezed my hand gently and said, "I meant it, you know. About this being something." "I know," I said. And I squeezed back. Life after the season didn't slow down the way I thought it would. There were still practices for spring training, off-season workouts, meetings with coaches about next year. Classes piled up. People started talking about internships, transfers, plans for the summer. I thought maybe when the season ended, Nick and I would fade back into just being teammates. Like it had been some fluke that only made sense when we were in that focused, adrenaline-soaked world of competition. But that didn't happen. If anything, things between us got more real. It started with the little things. Nick started staying over more. First once or twice a week, then most nights. He'd bring his charger, leave a hoodie draped over my desk chair, make sarcastic comments about my terrible instant coffee, and then drink it anyway. It wasn't romantic in any over-the-top way. It was casual, comfortable, like he was slipping into a version of himself he hadn't let out before. We still didn't label anything. Not out loud. But actions have a way of speaking louder, and Nick said more than he probably realized. Like how he'd reach for my hand under the table when we were studying in the library, or how, when I caught a cold and tried to tough it out, he showed up at my door with soup and a 6-pack of Gatorade like some kind of smug nurse. "You look like shit," he said, handing me the bag. "Thanks for the support," I muttered, sniffling. "Hey," he said, quieter, as I reached for the tissues. "Let me take care of you a little, yeah?" I don't think anyone had ever said that to me before. Not like that, not meaning it. And I think that was the moment I knew. This wasn't just a fling. This wasn't about the showers, or the flirting, or even the quiet makeouts on my bed at 2 a.m. I was falling for him. Hard. It terrified me. Not because I didn't want it. God, I wanted it. But because it felt so damn real. Like I was handing over this fragile, vulnerable part of myself that I'd kept locked up for years. And Nick, he was holding it like it wasn't a burden at all. Like it was something he'd been waiting to find. We had a conversation about it once, late one night. The kind where the world feels quiet and small, and your guard is down without even realizing it. We were lying on my bed, both of us shirtless, my head on his chest, his hand idly tracing circles on my back. "I used to think I had it all figured out," he said, voice low. "Yeah? Girls, locker room talk, what I was supposed to want, who I was supposed to be. And then, I prompted. He gave a soft laugh. "Then you started looking at me." I lifted my head a little. "So it's my fault?" "Pretty much," he said, smirking. "You wrecked everything." I kissed his shoulder. "Sorry about that." "Don't be," he said, brushing his fingers through my hair. "I like what came after." A pause settled between us, not awkward, just full. Then I said, "So what now?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Whatever we want. We don't have to rush." But I'm not going anywhere. That stayed with me. I think about it still, sometimes, how someone like Nick, who had every reason to keep things surface level and easy, chose to stay. Chose to lean in instead of pull back. And how, without meaning to, he helped me stop being afraid of wanting more. We still had stuff to figure out, still had awkward moments and questions we didn't have answers for. But there was a kind of peace in that too, a kind of trust. A few weeks later, he introduced me to his older brother, just casually, during a pickup game at a local park. We were sweaty, laughing, talking shit, like we always did, and when his brother showed up with Gatorades, Nick didn't flinch, didn't drop my hand, just smiled and said, "Hey, this is," and then said my name like it mattered. And I guess that was the moment I stopped waiting for something to break. Because maybe we weren't just teammates anymore, maybe we never really were.